are listening to the Star Lords Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
The Mandalorian Wars were a series of conflicts between the militant tribes of Mandalore and their invasion and conquest of the Old Republic. Almost 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, these wars resulted in devastation and ruin wrought across the galaxy for over 16 long years. This era would spawn a series of successive conflicts and purges that only resulted in more death and destruction for all those involved. Jedi, Sith, Mandalorians, and sentients of the Republic alike.
Conquest. Historians disagree on when the Mandalorian Wars officially started, and when they officially ended, as the Mandalorian clans had continuously conducted raids into Republic space before their crusade of conquest started in earnest. On the heels of the Great Sith War and the original Mandalorian Crusades. During the 20 years that followed the war, a 20-year era of peace, known as the Restoration Period, served as a buffer between the conflicts. The Republic was able to recover and rebuild from the devastation of the Great Sith War, and commerce, exploration, and prosperity resumed, and the Republic's influence spread through much of the galaxy. Despite the corruption of some corporate interests, peace reigned. For a short time at least, on the planet Mandalore, however, a disaffected group of Mandalorians dubbed themselves Neo-Crusaders, yearning again for the holy wars and glory of their past, and wanting to exploit new recruits and resources ripe for conquest. The movement found support in Mandalore, the Ultimate and his lieutenant, Cassus Fett. The Neo-Crusaders thought their predecessors and more traditional nomadic brethren as too disorganized to effectively exploit the worlds that they had brought to heel in the past. These Neo-Crusaders adopted a more organized hierarchical structure and began raiding and pillaging independent worlds on the Outer Rim, but quickly started encroaching into Republic space. The Republic was slow to respond to the initial raids, as the gears of government red tape, debate, and subcommittees tried to assess the true level of threat the Mandalorians represented. While Neo-Crusaders did not represent all Mandalorians, they were the ideological core, a cult of true believers that were able to rally others to their wars of aggression, acting as a vanguard and heart of less radical Mandalorian groups. Slaughter.
As the Neo-Crusaders conquered worlds, they would industrialize and recruit the occupied population, indoctrinating masses of new recruits into the Neo-Crusader cause. While this method of war-making was able to quickly produce large numbers of warriors for the conflicts to come, the mass recruitment led to a broader degradation in the quality of warriors that they produced, relying on either weight of numbers or radical zealotry to make up for their lack of skill. Despite this, the core of the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders were superior combatants and acted as the solid core and vanguard of the raids. Those under Mandalorian occupation that were not mass recruited into the military found themselves as slaves and producers for the war effort. Many criminals and beings who otherwise wanted to escape slavery or take part in the pillaging that followed a Mandalorian raid did not offer the best pool of candidates for warriors, further diminishing the quality of new recruits. The official beginning of the Mandalorian Wars is marked by the first battle of Althir, a void engagement between the marauding Mandalorians and the local Althiri fleet above the planet Althir III. The Neo-Crusaders were led by Canderous Ordo, a prolific Mandalorian battle leader who commanded his fleet to victory over the numerically superior Althiri at a 10-to-1 ratio. Following this battle, the Mandalorians invaded the world of Cathar to exact bloody revenge for their part in their defeat during the Great Sith War. This conquest, unlike the others where the conquered were given the option of servitude or conscription, was to be a war of extermination. Led by Cassus Fett, the Mandalorians descended on the world and slaughtered every Cathar they could find. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. It was at the climax of this event, the remaining Cathars had been herded into the ocean, where the final culling would occur. A lone Mandalorian female objected to the wanton slaughter, standing in defiance of Cassus Fett and putting herself between the Mandalorians and the remaining Cathar. At Cassus' command, the slaughter resumed, and the lone Mandalorian female died with the last of the Cathars on the planet. Her helmet would later become the signature visage of Darth Revan, who wore it in her memory of defiance in the face of genocide. A handful of refugees had escaped the carnage and fled on a number of ships bearing only a few hundred survivors into Republic space to hide and warn them of the coming storm, the last of their kind. When the Republic was informed of the travesty, they mobilized military assets knowing that war would soon come to them. However, they suppressed news of the slaughter to keep the population from panicking and rioting. The Mandalorians would continue their crusade of conquest, cutting swaths into the Tion hegemony and Hutt space among many other worlds. For 8 years, world after world, system after system would fall. Some worlds were conquered easily, others rallied defenses, and some, like the Hutts, hired mercenaries to defend their holdings. However, many would end up joining the Mandalorian cause themselves. The Mandalorians swept through the Outer Rim and began prodding the Mid-Rim territories, testing the Republic Navy and military forces. Slowly, Republic worlds began falling to Mandalorian advances, and the echoes of the war front penetrated deep into both the halls of the Republic government, but also into the sacred chambers of the Jedi.
Revanchism. The Jedi, though known to be powerful warriors, had sat out the war, though the growing accounts of atrocities of the Mandalorians had caused great consternation in the High Council. The Jedi clung to their values of peacemakers, worried that the taint of the dark side would infect them if they became warriors and were resolute not to engage in the war as soldiers. Despite the Council's decision, a young Jedi began voicing a counter-opinion to the Council of the Jedi, arguing in favor on intervention. These Jedi advocated for revanchism and wanted to take back the lost worlds of the Republic. Spurred on by the charismatic Jedi and his friend Alec, the pair recruited many of their colleagues into their movement. Their leader was branded a Jedi Crusader by the media and, against the Council's wishes, led the substantial warriors to the battlefront. Amidst the disharmony among the Jedi, the Padawan massacre incident also happened on the world of Taris, leading to further chaos on the world, and signaling to the Mandalorians that the time to invade the Republic in force had arrived. The Mandalorians invaded Vanquo and soon made a spearhead towards the Ecumenopolis of Taris. After forcing the Republic fleet into retreat, the Mandalorians began attacking Taris itself, the local home guard, and guerrilla forces made of local swoop gangs and police offering the only resistance, while a small crew of misfits and Jedi began their own operations against the Mandalorian war machine. Latching onto the narrative of the Jedi Crusader, the media dubbed him the Revanchist, and he soon uncovered the genocide of the Cathars while investigating the ruins of their world and donned the Mandalorian mask that would come to be his signature. Meanwhile, the Jedi High Council sent an interdiction force demanding the Revan and his followers to disband, but begrudgingly allowed him to continue his crusade after the discovery of the Cathar atrocity. Though they continued to publicly denounce him, Revan, as a conciliatory move, claimed that the Jedi under his command would join the Republic military as a mercy corps and act only as healers, though this would not last long. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians continued to conquer world after world, penetrating deep into Republic space and into the core worlds where they began staging for the invasion of Alderaan and Seraco. The infighting amongst the Jedi continued, and one group, led by Jedi Master and former Council member Dorja Case, who, having previously fallen in love with a Mandalorian during the Sith Wars, and believing the Republic irredeemably corrupt, set off with a band of former Revanchists to join the Mandalorians, adopting their traditions and values and becoming the Mandalorian Knights. The warriors adopted Mandalorian armor and wielded uniform yellow lightsaber blades and fought alongside the Mandalorians against the Republic, after serving as double agents and saboteurs amongst Republic forces before their identities were revealed. Dorja Case had planned to kidnap the Jedi younglings at Dantooine to raise a full generation of Mandalorian Knights. Collateral.
Believing the Mandalorians would not attack civilian targets due to their code of honor, Rear Admiral Saul Kareth stationed Republic forces right beside the world of Seraco's most populated centers. Yet it was at Seraco where the Mandalorians would add to their list of atrocities, firing a barrage of nuclear warheads at major population centers on the surface of the world, completely bypassing the Republic Navy ships stationed on guard. On the planet Jebel, as the Mandalorians planned to assault Alderaan, they discovered and awakened the Mirror Talisman, unleashing a Rakghoul plague amongst the Mandalorian army, forcing Cassius Fett to bombard the planet and his own forces with a barrage of nuclear warheads to stop the plague from spreading. Despite the delay in the Mandalorian advance, they continued their conquest, burning the Great Zojin fields on Ares III, whose fires burned a full decade later, and subjugated the worlds of Azure and Contrum, and Duro, along with the systems of Zell and Ambria. The war had spread across many sectors on multiple fronts, and despite the Mandalorian victories, Revan had led the Republic to many of their own. Supreme Chancellor Tal Kressa, under Republic pressure, appointed Revan Supreme Commander of Republic forces, owing to his celebrated victories against the seemingly unstoppable Mandalorians.
Revenge. It was under Revan's leadership that the Republic was able to push back the Mandalorian advance and liberate world after world. Personally taking to the battlefield, Revan broke the siege of Taris amongst a long list of other accomplishments. Alec, the Jedi warrior who had been one of Revan's earliest followers and closest allies, redubbed himself Malak, and was never far from Revan's side. Ever the strategist, however, Revan's victories came at a cost. He had strayed far from his Jedi ideals and began taking calculated risks, sacrificing worlds and lives in increasingly violent offensives, and prioritizing industrial and infrastructural assets over those that defended them, or allowing others to languish in order to score victories elsewhere. Revan and Malak began the policy of victory at all costs. This was exemplified when Revan's forces attacked the world of Onderon and the moon of Duxan, where it was said that the Republic forces lost 10 soldiers for each Mandalorian killed. As the war continued, the body count grew exponentially, and the galaxy as a whole suffered for it. He had also discovered an ancient star map of Rakatan design that led to a star forge, a super weapon capable of churning out almost unlimited war materials, able to subdue the galaxy, though he did not locate it before the end of the war. Additionally, Revan encountered the Treyas Academy on Malachor V, an ancient Sith institution of learning, where he began his first steps towards unlocking the knowledge of the dark side. Spurred on by his philosophy, willing to sacrifice anything and everything for victory. Endgame.
Despite their many victories, the Mandalorians had put up a strong defense, and the war began draining both sides of war materials and personnel. Revan decided that the war must end, and began preparations for forcing a final confrontation on the world of Malachor V, deploying a massive Republic fleet near the world to bait the Mandalorians into an attack. Meanwhile, he planted a super bomb on the planet's surface, the Mass Shadow Generator, capable of creating a powerful gravitational vortex, capable of cracking the surface of the world and dragging entire fleets into its iron grip, crushing them into oblivion. Under the command of Jedi General Mitra Surik, the Mandalorians attacked the Republic fleet as expected, and a devastating ship-to-ship battle began. As the tide turned against the Mandalorians, and sensing an inevitable defeat, Mandalore the Ultimate played one final gambit. He challenged Revan to single combat aboard his flagship. Revan accepted, and the two warriors engaged in a duel. Despite his strength and ferocity, Mandalore was defeated by Revan and slain. In his last moments, Mandalore told Revan a secret. He revealed that he had been manipulated by the Sith, and gave the coordinates to the planet Rekiad. Revan took the mask of the Mandalore, denying the warriors the ability to elect a new leader, and left them broken and in disarray. Despite his personal victory, the battle grew increasingly dubious as casualties on both sides began to mount. While out of range of the Mass Shadow Generator, Revan and Mitra Surik ordered the activation of the bomb. The survivors watched in horror as Republic and Mandalorian ships alike were caught inside the gravity vortex and dragged into each other and to the planet's surface, killing everyone caught in its devastating grip. Malachor itself, once a lush, verdant world, cracked under the strain, and tens of thousands died. So devastating and destructive was the superweapon that it created a wound in the Force, and Mitra Surik, the closest surviving Jedi to the blast, had to sever her ties to the Force entirely to avoid being killed from the shockwave caused in it. Though the Republic lost many ships and soldiers, the Mandalorians had been utterly defeated and issued their surrender. Revan had achieved his victory, but at what cost?
Aftermath. After hearing about the events at Malachor, the Jedi Council summoned all the Revanchists back to face judgment for their actions. Revan and Malak refused the summons and took their forces into the unknown regions, under the pretext that they were hunting Mandalorian survivors. Jedi Master Sirik, now severed from the Force, returned, however, against Malak's wishes. Revan and Malak would continue to Rekiad to confirm Mandalore's allegations of Sith manipulation. There, in the tomb of Dramath, the pair discovered the existence of a secret Sith empire through a datachron. Revan also left behind the mask of Mandalore in the tomb, and, with Malak, set off to find and kill the leader of this Sith empire. However, their plans and their fates would not be so simple. The Mandalorian Wars led directly to the Jedi Civil War, as Revan and his followers embraced the dark side after returning from their mission, newly christened Darth Revan and Darth Malak, and began a new war with the Republic. But that is a tale for another time. The Mandalorian Wars left scars on the galaxy that would not heal for generations. Many planets' populations had been utterly decimated. The Cathar species had been brought to the brink of extinction, and cities on worlds such as Sarko had been nuked into oblivion. Malachor had been destroyed, and the wound in the Force around the planet would be reflected in its survivors, Mitra Surak, who would transmit the terrible effects of what she had witnessed to others around her wherever she went. Force wounds also served as powerful locations of loss and pain for Force users, and were used by the Sith to re-establish an academy where the oppressive nature of the environment better served the Sith, and helped to erode the will of light-side Force users in their presence. The Republic was overall left reeling after the destruction of the war, and despite their small victory, left them barely able to withstand the following conflicts to come. Similarly, the Jedi Council was left split, those that followed Revan and those that followed the Council, and this cleft would soon turn to violence when Revan returned from his foray into the unknown regions, igniting a full-on Jedi civil war. The Mandalorian knights who had survived and surrendered earlier on in the fighting had been brought back to the Council for judgment and sentencing. The greatest losses, however, were suffered by the Mandalorians themselves, denied the ability to appoint a new leader due to Revan's confiscation of the Mask of Mandalore. The once cohesive Neo-Crusaders devolved to smaller clans, forming enclaves on whatever worlds they had been abandoned on by the end of the war. Leaderless, they again took to nomadic living, some going off into the galaxy as loners to live as pit fighters, mercenaries, or bounty hunters. The Tong species had been utterly decimated, and other species, like humans, would go on to carry the Mandalorian traditions and way of life, saving the culture, at least, from extinction. Revan ordered the destruction of the infamous Basilisk war droid the Mandalorians had ridden into battle. However, not all complied with the new directive, though most were destroyed, ending at least one brief mainstay of the Mandalorian people. He also ordered the stripping of Mandalorians of their weapons and armor, which greatly impinged on the proud warrior's honor and had limited success. Weapons of War.
The Mandalorian Wars had led to the development of and prevalence of many new technologies that would go on to shape the galaxy. Interdictor technology, or gravity-based weapons or tools, had been developed and advanced by Zabrak engineers, which culminated in the creation of the mass shadow generator. This technology would also go on to be used in ship-based gravity wells that could detain enemy ships from jumping into hyperspace, and eventually led to the Interdictor-class cruiser under the Empire thousands of years later. Ion technology, at least in weapon-based platforms, saw widespread use as a less lethal, disabling mode of attack, crippling enemy ships, weapons, or electromagnetic technologies. Most notable, however, was the discovery of ancient Rakatan star maps that would lead to the later discovery of the Starforged superweapon. Among this ancient technology was also the rediscovery of the Mirror Talisman, a dark Jedi artifact responsible for the creation of the Rakul Plague. This outbreak severely hampered the Mandalorian war effort when over 1 million of the warriors had been infected and devolved into salivating, bloodthirsty beasts, and prompting Cassius Fett to annihilate them with a barrage of nuclear weapons. The plague did persist, however, in the underlevels of Terrace. During the war, an entrepreneuring and profit-hungry private enterprise, the Adaska Biomechanical Corporation of Arcania, or ADAS Corp, attempted to introduce their own brand of superweapon into the war effort. They attempted to control and weaponize the massive Exogorth space worms, and attempted to auction them off to either the Republic, the Mandalorians, or the Revanchists. By selling their Exogorth technology to the highest bidder, ADAS Corp would ascend to be the most powerful corporate entity in the galaxy, and puppeteer for whatever faction won the war, though the use of the beasts. This plan was short-lived, however, as saboteurs exposed ADAS Corp's goals and destroyed ADAS Corp's flagship, along with the ability to tame the monstrous beasts. Most horrific were the experiments of one Dr. Demigol, a Mandalorian Neo-Crusader and high-ranking officer under Mandalore the Ultimate. Demigol, obsessed with scientific explanation and intent to create Mandalorian Force users, had conducted numerous and often torturous experiments that often killed his subjects. While his studies grossly underestimated the Force as something beyond mere scientific replication, his work, however grotesque, advanced scientific knowledge from the physiological elements of the Force. Though not many of his former subjects survived, his studies, those that did, such as one Alec, later named Malik, had never forgotten the torture inflicted by the Doctor, and took to personally hunting him to exact justice and/or revenge.
Darker motives. While the Mandalorian Wars were on a course for the warrior culture, modus operandi, they had also been the result of a darker underlying plot to attack the Jedi and weaken the Republic. A pure-blood Sith emissary approached Mandalore, the Ultimate, and, through a mixture of Force persuasion and the Mandalore's own deep-rooted desires to remove the stains of shame and guilt from their recent defeat in the Great Sith Wars, the emissary was able to influence Mandalore the Ultimate to take up arms against the Republic. The Sith Empire would continue to operate in the shadows, allowing their enemies to weaken each other, so that when the time was right, they would sweep in through a war-weary galaxy. The plan saw moderate success in the times after the Mandalorian Wars, including through the Jedi Civil War and the following Jedi Purges, culminating in the Great Galactic War that would follow. Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Wars Podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starwarspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon, so if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
This is Jordan.
We are currently sitting in orbit over the ruins of Malachor 5.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a little souvenir of a old busted off rock.
A little space rock for you. We'll got to hit up the asteroid field of Alderaan again at one point.
Yeah. I can definitely feel the dark side emanating out of this one rock. I can feel the deaths of millions of...
What a nice token. Yeah. Maybe we'll send it to a fan. Yeah, the Mandalorian Wars. First, I just want to get this out of the way. It is a big era with a lot of big characters. We will definitely be revisiting this time and these people with all their own episodes and their own content. This was just kind of a brief overview of everything. We couldn't delve into the nitty-gritty of every event and every person that was involved. Believe me, I really wanted to, but the script ended up being twice as long. So we will be coming back to this stuff eventually. Let's really touch on Revan real quick because he is a fan favorite character. And I don't want to delve too much into him because I want to save stuff for his own episode. But just real fast here, Revan Chisholm, and he adopted the title of Revan Chist for a little while. And even the word Revan all actually have a meaning. A lot of Sith Lords, their names have some kind of connotation in real life. Plagueis, Vader, Invader, Maul. I think we've touched on this before. For Revan and Revanchism is very interesting, which I didn't know until writing this episode. I thought it was just a cool word that they decided to name their main character. But it does mean to reclaim lost territory, kind of like in a vengeful manner, which is exactly what Revan did. By the time he got involved in the war, the Republic had already lost a lot of planets to the Mandalorians. And so he was the one that was like saying, let's take it back. Let's take back lost territory, which is exactly what Revanchism is. So I thought that was a cool link. Again, I didn't know that before.
Yeah, I hadn't actually realized that the name was like lifted from the actual word.
Yeah, it actually has a meaning and stuff, which is cool. It was a quite literal meaning.
Yeah.
To what Revan was doing.
Yeah. I also didn't realize Malik's name was Alec.
Yeah. He didn't do quite the big change, but
yeah.
Yeah, and Malak has its own cool connotations, which maybe I'll save for a Malak episode because there's a lot to discuss there. But We're not talking about Revan and Malak right now. We're talking about the Mandalorian Wars in general.
Indeed.
One thing very interesting, well, a couple of things, some historical context too. The Cathars. So anyone that's played the game, Juhani, anyone remembers they look like cats. I'm sure that wasn't a missed opportunity. But the Cathars and their extermination is also linked to a real life event, which an offshoot of Catholicism in Lower France and Italy, the Cathar persecutions, where they essentially declared the Catholic Church declared a crusade on the Cathars and exterminated them ultimately. Which is, again, lifted directly from history.
Clearly.
Crusaders come in and annihilate the Cathars. It would have been cool if they had a little more linkage, like maybe they were some kind of heretics or something, or maybe they didn't want to be too on the nose with it. Because it just seemed like the Mandalorians just particularly hated the Cathars because of the the Cathar's vague involvement in the Great Sith Wars prior to the Mandalorian Wars. So this is kind of like a vengeance thing. This is also the first time we see Mandalorians like adopting other species into their ranks. So prior to this point, they're mostly Tongs.
Yeah.
And then they started recruiting other people, and like you can see it in a lot of the cool Knights of the Old Republic comic books. You can see the Mandalorians have like very unique armor based on different species that have joined them, which is very cool. And then that changes too. So another unique thing to the Neo Crusaders specifically is this like uniformity, which isn't typical of the Mandalorians prior to this point. So their armor goes from like, being very, during this period, goes from like individualized to like color coded command structure. Blue are like frontline soldiers, red are like mid-tier supervisors, and then yellow are like, your commanders and things. And the armor all looks the same. They really strive for uniformity in there, at least in the core of the Neo Crusader force. So that was cool, and you see that in the Knights of the Old Republic video games as well. Overall, very bloody time.
Indeed.
The Mandalorians are painted in a very dark light, especially compared to the Mandalorians of like if you're watching modern Disney interpretation of Mandalorians, a lot more noble, less violent.
But I think that's fair though, because the newer interpretation of the Mandalorians, they're so far removed from the Mandalorian Wars that you could arguably say, and they're so fringe too.
This is thousands of years later, and this Neo Crusaders are a specific subset of Mandalorians. You got to remember, it's not everyone.
Yeah, and they're a dominant force in the galaxy, right? Like, the incentive structure is different when you're an empire, to wage war in a certain way, to when you're like an eclectic, small group of dispersed, like diaspora. Across the galaxy. So
it's a very different.
I think it's just a different dynamic. So to me, it's a believable explanation. Anyways.
No, and it's cool.
A believable, I guess, transition from being like ruthless warmongers to being, more noble mercenaries. The other thing too that they do go out of their way to mention is like the recruitment of other species was like very like quick, and like it degraded the quality of warrior that they're also getting. So it's kind of a trade-off in the fact that they're recruiting mass armies to fight a bigger war, right? Rather than this elite core of special soldiers that, if you get engaged in a really protracted battle, your casualties are going to be too devastating to like continue that kind of fighting. So even the style of war making is very different. One thing I kind of like, actually, going back to like Disney Mandalorian canon, all the way back to 4,000 years before that, is the armor is like very similar, and they keep the style of armor the same throughout. So I think that's kind of cool. They didn't change it too much up in Disney.
Yeah, with the T-visor and.
Yeah, no, but just like the armor plating and stuff like that. Like overall, it's like very similar. Like it's very believable that this is the same culture.
It's an evolution.
It survived throughout the thousands of years and it hasn't changed much, which I just like a consistent through line, kind of.
Yeah. Some cool things too to note. It felt like, I don't know. You tell me, because you played the games too. I feel like in one iteration, I don't know, BioWare did a really good job of like balancing, making the Mandalorians like sympathetic and cool, but also bloodthirsty and ruthless.
Yeah.
Where like whenever you hear Candace Ordo talk about it, it's very like reminiscing of old glory days.
Yeah.
And then sometimes other characters, especially Republic characters who also veterans of the war, push back. I'm like, no, you just slaughtered people and you're just violent.
Right.
And you see that dynamic throughout. But there's also people trying to, like, in the narrative, rescue the Mandalorians from just being, this monstrous. Like, they have some pretty monstrous characters. Demigul is almost this, like, Dr. Mangala type figure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that came through in the scripted portion so much, but, like, he's experimenting on Force users. He's very, like, harsh in his treatment of his subjects, obviously. And the Mandalorians overall are, like him specifically, is looking to unlock the secrets of the Force through genetics and stuff. which also comes up as kind of a theme that we see through the Mandalorian TV show currently, and like the Bad Batch and stuff. There's an unspoken narrative through line about genetics and force use that we haven't. The plot hasn't fully unraveled in that area yet, but we're still, why did the Imperials? Why were they testing Grogu? What did they want to do? Are they cloning him? Are they looking to make Force user clones? Right. This narrative of the Force and clone technology has been around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with Legends, and Palpatine and all that, there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that we have seen in one iteration, and it's interesting to see where Disney might go with this kind of through line in the future.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you too, though, about like it is interesting that the transition between like the Mandalorian Wars into the Jedi Civil Wars. When you're playing the game, you're kind of stuck in the middle of this as the Jedi Civil Wars are about to take off.
No, you're like mid Civil War in KOTOR 1. Because Revan's Revan already came back.
Yeah.
And then kind of made his reputation as a Sith Lord. And then,
and the Civil War ends by the time you're finished the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I think it's like, it is interesting. I almost wonder, I've sort of watched like a lot of period pieces about like the end of World War I and sort of the devastation that had happened and how it really changed society a lot.
Yeah.
Especially like with people who came back and they had like really major injuries or their
PTSD and shell shock and like actual maimings and
yeah, exactly, all that kind of stuff, and how like I think it sort of maybe change, because I think prior to World War I there was like a lot of honor in going to war.
Yeah,
and
it was painted in a very romantic way.
Yeah, and everyone wanted to like go and fight for his country. And then after World War I think attitudes started to change. At least this is the way it's been depicted. I can't say that for sure. I'm just like saying how I've seen it being depicted or read about it being depicted. Is like World War I, like attitudes started to change because it was such a horrific war and traumatic for a lot of everyone who was involved. I think it just had like this very long effect on people. And really what happened in World War I is really, if you look at it in context, those are the events that led to World War II, right? Like it sort of set up Europe for everything that was going to happen in World War II. But it's just interesting. I feel like they kind of pulled maybe some of those elements from the game where, you have like a lot of people really distraught over the war, the devastation that it caused. It was so bloody. And
you're always
so
hearing
merciless.
Characters talking about the war.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Aside from a few Mandalorian characters who enjoyed those times, everyone else is like so scarred from it, and you could see it. Like you could see it in the characters. You can see it in the psyche, on the world. Some of them that you visit are just like war ravaged and ruined, and
exactly. Like just seeing the face of someone who returned from the war and like there's no soul left in them,
hollowed eyes.
I kind of got that feeling out of sort of coming out of the Mandalorian Wars and what happened there, but I don't know that that's what the writers were intending. I'm just sort of,
I do think there is a very strong like commentary on war and even how you lose your soul, right? Revan starts out as this like noble crusader. The media loves him. The Jedi Council's like, oh, we're not so sure about this. So we're worried our souls might get tainted by going to war. And Revan's like, and it's not that they're good at making like a complex, like it's hard to say like, Revan was wrong for doing this or Revan was right for doing this, because what Revan sees, he sees like the slaughter of the Cathars and he's like, no, we need to intervene. These Mandalorians are coming for us. They've already done so much evil. We need to stop them. So you have that kind of narrative, but you also have the narrative of like Revan loses his soul in this war. He starts, victory at all costs kind of mentality, which eventually corrupts him into a Sith Lord.
But at the same time, you can't blame Revan, like the character's motivations. I think the way that the Mandalorian Wars are portrayed is they were so devastating, so complete, so just mountains of skulls and rivers of blood, and it was just such a traumatic thing that happened. You could probably empathize with how Revan felt and why he was so motivated to enter the war. And
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's morally, they're really good at playing this morally gray. Like, was he or wasn't he right? Did he make the right
In fact,
call?
if you put yourself in those shoes as like a citizen, I think you would be like appalled that the Jedi aren't getting involved.
Yeah, they're
right.
like, we have these powerful warriors just sitting in the back lines while other people are
getting
being slaughtered.
Yeah. I think you'd have like a very visceral feeling, and then, but I think it's with the conceptually what the Force is and how it affects people. It's very dangerous when people who are like very capable in the Force start playing that game, right? Like, because then they can easily be tainted, and I think it's almost better for like, Canderous Ordo type people, or what's his name, Carthonasi or whatever, because they'll sort of stick to their principles no matter what, but they can't really be tainted the same way that I think a Force user can,
right?
Especially experiencing that kind of savagery.
Yeah, but that's even a commentary on humans, like you were saying, like the scars of war. They stay in your soul, right? Like, what did you do in the battlefield, when you were put in that situation? How did you lose yourself? How did part of you die? How did you compromise your own moral standards? And did you? Some people may not. But those are like really heavy questions that come from war that I think the entire era of the Mandalorian Wars and Knights of the Old Republic are commenting on.
Yeah.
Right? And you hear that a lot through the dialogue of the characters and things like that as well.
There needs to be more media made on the Mandalorian Wars, I think.
Yeah, it'd be a cool area to explore. There's a comic series that kind of like dances around it. It doesn't engage with it directly.
Yeah.
You follow
probably
like
a few novels,
side band of characters.
I haven't looked.
I imagine the Revan book might delve into it somewhat. And you also see the Mandalorian perspective too, which is cool. And I'm always down for more Mandalorian content, even if they are bloodthirsty. There was another point I wanted to make. I'm kind of forgetting here. One thing that I don't totally appreciate that they have done. So for the Knights of the Old Republic RPG game that's come out now, they've kind of gone back and retconned some of the stuff from KOTOR. So
you mean like the online?
Yeah, the MMO.
Yeah.
The mass multiplayer online game.
The Old Republic Online, I think.
The Old Republic, sorry. Yeah. So they've gone back and kind of retconned Knights of the Old Republic, and even the incentive for the Mandalorian Wars now has been retconned into this, like, it was all a plot by the Sith who kind of triggered this war and as a means to weaken their enemies and then come back in full force later. It's understandable, I guess I should say, because it does play to how the Sith think. And it is something that Sith would do, and it's very much in line with like the Sith manipulating events in the background, weakening all their enemies, making the Mandalorians and the Republic fight each other into this brutal, horrific conflict, and then just coming in to sweep in and be pretty much unchallenged. But I think it robs some of the agency and like kind of what we were talking about, the narrative of war. Like, Revan just becomes a puppet now rather than someone with agency.
Yeah.
Mandalore the Ultimate, again, leading the Mandalorians also becomes a puppet rather than a character with agency. And that's something that the MMO has done, is just robbed all these characters of their agency and just made them puppets for a bigger bad who's like manipulating things behind the scenes.
I think I feel similarly to you. It sounds too like Illuminati to me. And that's not really how it's more realistic to actually believe that a bunch of things just happen and then
people made mistakes. Different people's choices affected other people, good or bad, and chaos ensues.
It wasn't all just like kind of orchestrated.
All part of the plan.
Yeah, new world order, new galaxy order.
But that is totally what the Sith do. That's what I'm saying. Like it does. It is in line with what they would do. For this conflict, I don't know. I'd like the characters to have agency. I'd like that morally gray they're making choices in hard situations. They're not just being manipulated by some greater evil, that everyone can just rally behind being the bad guys. And then that also in the great Sith, or the great, oh my gosh, there's too many Star Wars and Star Wars.
Yeah.
The Great Galactic War, and then the Cold War that follows. You have this like Third Empire that comes into play, and we'll get into all those in their own episodes. But this is like the prelude to all that now, because the Sith essentially manipulated Mandalore the Ultimate into triggering this crusade.
Yeah.
Now, Mandalore the Ultimate wanted to do these things anyways because it's in line with his culture, his ideals, the Neo-Crusader values. They wanted revenge for their losses during the previous war.
Yeah.
And even that is like a kind of a comment on war, just like begetting more war, right?
Yeah, yeah.
World War I leads to World War II, leads to the Cold War, leads to, again, I kind of joked about it, but a lot of wars in Star Wars are just like this cyclical cycle of violence.
Everything is kind of connected in terms of like conflicts and a lot of conflict. Even today, a lot of conflicts that we see now
are rooted 100 years ago.
Yeah, you can trace it back to
even World War I. The effects are being felt today, right?
Yep.
The way some borders are drawn, the way certain factions see each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a very real thing that happens. And even me, when I'm writing this, I'm like listing all the different wars and conflicts that came out of the Mandalorian Wars, and even the Mandalorian Wars being a war triggered by a previous war. The Sith Wars, like, that is history, man.
Yeah,
it's just
that's right.
Wars on top of wars and violence on top of violence. Maybe that's why they wrote this. It's almost like an anti-war piece.
Yeah, maybe.
Too many wars in Star Wars.
It is called Star Wars. Yeah,
and it's it's kind of interesting to reflect on all this while we're just drifting in the asteroid field of Malachor, where Malachor represents kind of a physical version of that scarring. That soul scarring on the galaxy. So
it's sort of like ground zero of Hiroshima or something.
Yeah, right. Like this big life-robbing event that's left its mark on so many people after the fact. And again, there's so much to break into. I'm trying to avoid like discussing certain characters and things because we do want to come back and revisit this era and this time and take our time with it. So we'll just leave that here as a memory, and we will come back and visit again.
Indeed. Peace.